I think I may have found a telephoto lens that's better than the 70 to 200. But first, let's talk about it. So I was recently able to get my hands on a Sigma 100 to 400 telephoto lens, and honestly, it has its pros and cons. Now, this is not going to be a highly detailed video of this lens. It's going to be more so ever of a user experience and the pros and cons that I had when using this lens. So number one, if you're worried about this lens not being as sharp as the Sony lineup, don't even worry, because this lens is extremely sharp. And just like any other of the Sigma lineup, Sigma is known to make very sharp glass, so it's very sharp. I didn't really have that wonder or thought if it was going to be sharp enough. It was sharp off rip. The lens itself, it's not really heavy, but it's not that light either. I noticed when I have it in my bag and I spend 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours walking, it does weigh a toll on my back, which could be an issue for some people who don't want that heavy weight, but it's a telephoto lens at the end of the day, so you really can't complain about that. If you're really worried about weight, then you're gonna have to spend the hefty price tag of getting the G Master 2.8 70 to 200. But for the 100 to 400, it's pretty heavy, but again, it's not that heavy. You just really feel it when you're walking for a long time and it's in your bag. Now this lens, I noticed when I was using it with my FX6, it did have pretty good autofocus. I mean, not as good as Sony, obviously, because it's a native lens with a native body, but it was okay for the most part. I found myself not really using it when I was doing my wildlife videography. I found myself more so ever pulling focus myself, because this lens, compared with the FX6 rigged out, it was really heavy. So for me to try to hold it steady and try to get autofocus, it just wasn't working out for me. So I honestly had it in manual focus the whole time that I used it, and so I was pulling focus myself. Now the focus ring on the lens itself, it's okay. It doesn't feel too bad. I mean, I have felt better focus rings, but for the most part, I didn't really have too much of a big issue with it. When I was using this lens, I found myself always zooming in to 400 millimeters, because there's something about a 100 to 400 that just hits different. Like, it really is a great wildlife photography, videography lens. Like, I highly enjoyed it. Now, honestly, let's get into some cons. Now, one of the most biggest cons that I had when using this lens was the f-stop. It's not a consistent f-stop. It goes from f5 all the way to 6.3. And if you're new to my channel and you don't know what camera I use, I primarily use a Sony FX6. And if you know anything about an FX6, I shoot in Cine EI for all my projects, and I only have two base ISOs of 800 and 12,800. So when I shoot at 800 on a bright sunny day and I'm going down to f6.3, it is not good at all. Like, I found myself struggling. Actually, all the footage that you see in this video, I actually had to bump the ISO up to 12,800 and really raise up the ND filter that's on the camera and just hope that the footage was going to be really good, because you know, with the FX6 you got to overexpose by 2 stops. So it just made my workflow so much more difficult. Now I feel like if you have a mirrorless body, that's not going to be an issue at all. If I still have my A7S III, this would not be an issue at all. But because I use Cine EI and I only have 2 ISOs, it made it a lot more difficult, and I bought the FX6 to be more efficient, to be more quicker. And with this lens, if I was to purchase it, it would slow me down, because with this lens, I had to constantly play around with my ND filter and my ISO to properly get good exposure, and it just made my workflow so much more difficult, and I did not like that. And I feel like if you're in a situation where you're a wildlife photographer or a videographer and you're trying to capture that moment, because you don't have much time, depending on the animal you're filming, it can move quick, it can get scared, it can get spooked or whatever, you know what I mean? You don't have that time to sit here and dial in your ISO. But that's only an issue with me because I have the FX6. Now, again, if you have a mirrorless body, this is not going to be an issue for you at all. This lens does get dust inside the glass, and I know that Sigma said with the DGDN, they kind of improved it. Now, this lens was a rental. So, because of that, maybe the people before me didn't take care of it, but it did have a lot of dust that was inside the glass. Now, who is this lens for? I honestly think that this lens is great for photographers, it's great for videographers. I don't really think that it would be good for people who use cinema cameras like myself, because biggest issue was the ISO. Now, if you don't mind taking that extra time to play around with your ISO, play around with your ND filter, then by all means go ahead and get it if you're using a cinema camera. But I think this lens, from someone who's using a mirrorless body, would enjoy a lot more than I did. Biggest thing is just that f-stop, because I plan on buying this lens for conference work, and then whenever I go out and take wildlife videography, that would only be the reason why I use it. And for me, it would more be used for conference work, and I think if I'm in a conference that's really dark, I think that would just give me too much of a headache. It would literally stress me out, and I just don't want that. Now, honestly, it's not a big issue if you're in bright daylight and you have all the ISOs to play with and you zoom all the way to 400 and you're at 6.3, because at the end of the day, you're not really going to want to be at a 2.8 when you're in bright daylight like this. It's just not going to make any sense. When you zoom out all the way to 400, you're going to get that shallow depth of field. You're going to get that compression. So I'm not really complaining about it being a 6.3. Oh my gosh, it's so bad. No, I'm complaining more about the Cine EI that I only have 2 ISOs. So just understand that. But again, if I had my mirrorless body A7S III, I would be perfectly fine. I honestly probably would have picked it up. But I'm just sharing with you a couple of pros and cons that I came across about this lens. You should pick it up if you're a photographer, if you're a hybrid shooter. I think that this is a great lens for the price. Now, if you want to stick with the Sony native lineup or the Canon native lineup, then by all means, that's probably going to do you a little bit better, because it's going to have a consistent aperture and it's going to have a better autofocus because it's with a native lineup. I think that if you have the money for those, then you can go ahead and buy those. But if you're balling on a budget and you don't really want to spend too much, or if you're like me and you don't really know what you're going to use it for or how much you're going to use it, then I think that this is a great option. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. That's it. I think you should maybe go pick up a telephoto lens, or just go get a prime lens, you know, just get whatever. I'll be on to Buongiorno.